Hey, this is James from All Hail Internal Combustion. We're back to working on our Pontiac motor in the 66 Le Mans. We got the motor out, we got it all torn down, and what we did first was we knocked all the major grease, grime, all that crap off of it, and gave it a very thorough visual inspection. You want to check up in here to make sure you don't have any cracks between a water jacket and a cylinder wall. So all that looked really good on this engine. We started the process of deburring the outside of the block to take all the sharp edges off of it, casting flaws and stuff like that. And now we'll go over to the lifter valley. These engines are heavy, I'll tell you. Yeah, that's good. Alright, so down here in the lifter valley, we also checked for cracks or anything else that could give us problems down the road. There's not a lot of casting flash here. There's a lot in the heads. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to smooth all these edges out for oil return flow. We're going to take this one down a little bit and put a little bit of neck into it to feed the oil to the timing gears. So everything here looks good. And I did a thorough inspection down the cylinders. What I did was I took an old piston ring. I put it up here where the ridge is. And I took a measurement of it. Then I dropped it down right below to where the ring was originally sitting. I took a measurement of that. Then I dropped it farther down the bore and took a measurement of that to see how far off we are on the taper. The amount that we're off, I'm not concerned about, so I'm not going to send this thing to a machine shop and have it bored and all that. It's still got a standard bore in it, tapers within tolerance, and there's no major scarring, scratches, discoloration, or anything in the cylinders, so we're going to be able to go ahead and clean this thing up, hone it, and put some new rings into it and get it to seal.
Trick too, if you're putting your piston rings in, you want to make sure that you're getting a nice consistent level. You can actually use your piston to gauge how far your rings are going down. So you can just drop it in, put your ring in, and then not into the piston but into the cylinder, and then drop it down to where the skirt is.
And line your ears of your skirt up for your far end, and have one of your pistons with a ring on the second one to set your top measurement, so you can take the measurement between the piston and the ring there.
So that's a good way to double check and make sure you got your ring down in there. So if anybody's familiar with Pontiac, is that there's a lot of times that there's a lot of casting flash inside of this motor, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody said somebody had been in my motor before, which is highly unlikely for considering it only had 55,000 miles on it. But actually the casting flash in this motor is actually pretty good. It's not horrible, but an hour or two on taking all this down could increase oil capacity back down into the pan and get the cam coated a little bit more, and kind of help with lubrication, because we were obviously having some issues with that. So in the meantime, I'm sure if you didn't see the short of how to remount your bolt holes or clean them out, chase them, just making sure I clean everything up. And we're going to get this, once we get everything cleaned up, I'm going to power wash it. Now, another thing I noticed too is there's these big heavy casting gouges on where the oil pan sits. And you can see up here, I took them out with a
3M whiz wheel.
3M whiz wheel, right? And I just to make sure that I'm not taking too much out, I just take my magical machining straight edge and put it down on there and shine a flashlight behind it. And I can't see any flashlight coming in through there. Your oil pan has a fair amount of flex, and I've done this myself a lot, and people are always like, don't take too much out of the gasket surface. And really, you do have some room to perfect this surface so that you can get a little bit tighter of a seal.
Don't take an angle grinder to it with a grinding disc, but if you find a more controllable way to clean these things up, you can. Don't do it on your deck surface where your heads go, and don't do it on your heads. But other places, you've got some room to work.
Timing cover, oil pan, valve covers, all that stuff. That can be, on the older blocks, you don't really have to worry about the valve covers so much. But I did it on the timing, actually. The timing covers up here, there's a lot of pitting around the water passages from people putting really shitty water into this block. But so this side, you can actually see is pretty cleaned off now. There's not a lot of pitting there. And if you look at the other side, there's still a lot of pitting around there.
It's pitastic.
I didn't have any leaking or anything there, but again, you take your machining edge and make sure that you're touching over here on both sides all the way around. And, with a little RTV and a gasket, it'll seal right up. But, to take those pits out and make sure that surface is completely flat really, really assures that you're not going to have a small drip or a leak from there. So I've put tons and tons of gaskets and redone gasket surfaces, and as long as you are patient, you take your time, you can recondition the surface to be better than it was. Just don't do something crazy like use an angle grinder or a putty knife. I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff. So if you don't have a lot of experience with it, you should practice on something that's not so important. So and on the head surface, you don't really get a lot of pitting, but we do have some pitting where water passages in the head dead off and don't go anywhere inside of the head on the block. These are water passages that, because Pontiac heads are reversible to one side to the other, they'll line up on the other side, but not this side. So these are actually lower pitting areas. But when I buy head gaskets, I'll buy a nice set of head gaskets that maybe have a rubber neoprene seal around there, just so that I don't think they're neoprene, but Felpro makes some really nice head gaskets and other companies too. So
some kind of space age material.
Yeah. But then again, I wasn't having any head gaskets. Another notable point we had on this is this oil return that looks like it goes to the back of the cam and possibly the distributor gear. Look how throttled down and in back this is. There's so much flashing around this hole, and actually when we pulled the motor apart, we found a lot of places that the oil was pulled up. This was one of the places the flashing was so big here that the oil actually pulled right here, which, it's just a small droplet of oil, but as the oil's running down here and it's catching on these dots and on this hump and on this flashing, you're losing that capacity all throughout the motor. It does add up down the road. So,
and one mistake a lot of people make is, let me just throw a high volume oil pump on it. High volume oil pumps are great until you pumped all the oil into the top of your engine and you start to
dry pump.
dry your system out, and then for that 1 or 2 seconds or a half a second that your crankshaft does not have oil, you're beating your motor to death. I'm fine with a high pressure pump. You just got to watch the high volume pumps unless you've done this machine work. And currently on this block, we've probably got about 4 hours into it now. We're probably going to have another 3 hours into it by the time it's said and done with this block.
Just on the block.
Yeah, just on block prep. But we know when we put this thing back together, it's going to be smooth, it's going to be clean, the surfaces are going to be good. And if you have the opportunity to do this to your block, by all means do it. Because remember, you're going to be the guy working on it next time. And why work on something that's going to make you bleed every time you go to touch it?
And here's a beautiful thing about the Pontiac V8, that all 11 there were 11 blocks exactly identical. Let's say down the road I find some 350 or a 400 and I just throw it in there and I pull this block back out. I could have this punched out. All Pontiacs use the same connecting rods. Get, let's say, 400, 421, 455 pistons, whatever I want. And I could have these punched out, have this block machined. And yes, that will cost a little bit of money, but the deburring is already done on this block. So it's super clean. So it's one of those things you could weigh your options. Well, I have the money for the machine work, so let me go ahead and have the machine work done to turn this into a good block or a bigger displacement motor, and all the deburring's already done, or spend 8 hours on a 455 that I don't have any idea about its history. And, you know, it could be a 200,000 mile 455 that you pull apart and realize that the whole thing is roasted and you have to replace everything anyway. So, you know, when you're weighing your options, what's great, I think, about the Pontiac V8 is that this block is kind of universal. I know that I think with the 455s and the 400s that the crank is different and the cam is different, but, you know, it can always be line bored and all that good stuff. So, I also read in my Pontiac V8 book for rebuilding this that the different Pontiac V8s came with different pressured oil pumps. I'm going to fact check that, and we might even go into taking a step up on an oil pump with going up with a cam and everything, only to 60 psi instead of 40, just so I have a little bit extra. I found that the oil pump I had would drop sometimes at higher RPMs. Around 3,800 to 4,000, I was only putting out 40 psi, which is okay, you know, but I'd rather have a little bit more at high RPM. And I do dog the car, and I do play around in it. So, I mean, you know, I'm building the motor realistically for what I'm using the car for. So, anyway, this is the Jameses from All Hail Internal Combustion. We'll see you next time. Have a good day.
And remember, there is no big or small block Pontiac.
No.
Don't say that to people. Just don't. We love you.
They don't exist.
All right.
They don't exist.
See you next time.
See ya.